Well, okay then. We're recording.
Right, we're off.
Um, we're off. And Kyle, the hell are we here for? What are we doing? Tell the people.
What are we doing? We're swirling. We're chasing rabbits. We are following up. Not following up.
Closing the loop?
We're continuing the flow. Um, we are running with the energy that came off of 2 weeks ago now, the Complexity Lounge conversation that we were asked to host. That was really enjoyable, really engaging, really shifted from that participatory design topic to just how do you do this? What does it look for like for practitioners? Show me something practical. I want field notes. What does it mean to get dirty? That kind of stuff. And we couldn't answer all those questions. There was just so much. And so, that being such a rich topic, here we are. This requires so much more time and attention and space generated. And so, I think the probe extends to let's just hit record and see what we do. What do you think?
I totally agree. For anybody who's like, what the hell are you talking about? We'll put a link or find some way when we share this. Definitely go watch that session first if you didn't or you don't have any idea what we're talking about. And then if you did see that session and it left you wanting more, or it left you completely dissatisfied and you felt like it didn't deliver at all on what you're hoping it would, this is a continuation of the process to see what else we can offer. Kyle, why us? Are we experts and have we got all the answers?
I don't think there are experts in this space.
Soft. Very good. Okay.
Right? Yeah, we're there. We're on the frontier. We're in the hinterlands.
Or behind the
Um,
lines.
that's it. We're behind enemy line. There's so many metaphors. Fill in your blank. You
Yeah.
know. Um, yeah, I think we've been here for a little bit. We're the rugged sort of. We've been sort of the grizzly folk out there.
I
um,
prefer to think of myself as the Jane Goodall. No, I'm just
there
kidding.
you go. Yeah.
We've talked a bit about that. We should actually dive into metaphors. But yeah, I think the spirit of this also for anybody who is kind of encountering us here for the first time is largely that we field a lot of questions from our peers and fellow practitioners because for various reasons, Kyle and I, among many, 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 many others in the world, have been sort of somewhat lucky, somewhat also luck made by us and others to be able to bring complexity science and complexity informed practices into our day jobs, frankly. And so we don't have all the answers, but we get enough questions from folks about how we do it, how we earn the right to do it, how we actually do it, and what happens when we do it. And I say it like doing complexity. But yeah, so we just kind of wanted to continue the conversation. And our intention truly is also to hopefully open this and continue to bring in some other voices. And also when we reconvene for another Complexity Lounge session live later this fall, hopefully folks will have both watched the first one and will watch some of what we're about to record here, which we hesitate to call a podcast. And we're thinking about this more like, let's just have some recorded conversations where we respond to more of the things we heard live and try to answer some of those questions, but also pose more of our own. And then if folks have actually watched that, hopefully they'll come to the next live session with yes ands and questions where they want to hear more detail about something or want to challenge us on something or add their own story to the mix. So that's the goal. Maybe enough about context and let's just like dive right in. So for those who were there, you will recall we gave everybody who was live a chance to pose questions. And other people could like upvote some of the most popular, but even then there were several questions that really asked very similar things. Kyle and I answered or spoke to a few, and we had a few people in the audience who were also, awesomely willing to share their own stories in response. But there are several we didn't even have a chance to touch. So we wanted to get into some of those. And Kyle and I have a lot of stuff that we think that we just happen to talk about when we meet one-on-one for things that maybe others who are trying to bring more of this into their work could find useful. So what do you think, Kyle? Where to start?
Yeah. Let's jump into the questions.
Okay.
So I'm gonna I grabbed a few of these here that seemed. These aren't the juiciest of them, but I think they're the right place to jump off.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, what are your top 5 principles?
The worst question. I saw this when this came through when we did the
Mm-hmm.
and I
So
was
maybe it
like,
is the juiciest.
did we just delete this? Because I don't know what this question means. And honestly, truly, if this is whoever asked this, if you happen to watch this and come to the next session, like let us know. I hear two things in this question. I think that this person might be asking principles about complexity, or in other words, if you learn enough about complexity science and applying it to the work, you know that you kind of can't rely on best practices because things are shifting and things are emergent. So if you've already kind of drunk that Kool-Aid and get that, I kind of hear someone going like, well, okay, if I can't have best practices, then what are the principles I can follow instead? So there's almost like a little Indiana Jones swapperoo, I think sometimes folks are trying to do. If this person is asking for principles about how to apply complexity science, then we can talk a bit about that. If this person is asking about principles that like are our personal principles that we bring to the work, that's a very different question. I don't like either question because to me, principles kind of start to become not that far, maybe a slippery slope towards rules and heuristics that we have plenty of already in the world. But I'm willing to play game and try to answer this. But what is your
There you
answer?
go.
What is your which of those two are you thinking this was?
I'm a little bit more prepared for this.
Ooh,
I go into
go for it.
large organizations and I have to sort of rally, and it takes those heuristics or these principles to say there's no rules, there's no process, but this is the thing that will bind us to an extent. And if you took one of my decks from 6 months ago, compare it to one from 2 years ago, maybe four will be different. One of them would have transferred, or I would have reframed it a number of different ways.
Yeah.
So they're elastic to an extent. So I wouldn't call any of this carved in stone, but I appreciate this question for that reason. So I
Go
think it
for it.
is sort of I can't disseminate between like my principles and the principles I bring to this work
Yep.
because I part of the reason why I do this work is because I don't have a good level of tolerance for like seeing the bullshit and not being able to address it and sleep at night and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so
Well,
it's all the same
I
to
want
me.
to hear your principles then. I
Yeah.
mean, I actually
Okay.
should very quickly like walk back my like snark about principles because I actually make the point a lot of times with clients that when you can't rely on hard and fast universal rules or best practices, yeah, what do you work with? Loose principles that can become adjusted for context dependent scenarios, da, 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 da. And I have at times talked quite a bit about certain things that I guess we could call principles, but I'm
Hmm.
so reluctant. So
Sure.
you go and
Totally get
I'll
it.
respond.
Okay. So now do I remember all 5 of them? So I don't know. A couple of them that come to mind, whatever they are. So uh, one is that this is a space that requires participation. It requires the acknowledgement that people are impacted. And so one thing I dispel of is the idea of users versus stakeholders versus customers versus designers, all of that, impacted people. And I think I got that from Antoinette Carroll, listening to one of her talks a while ago. Impacted people, if they are impacted, they deserve a seat at the table, or at least representation, and some degree of self-representation, not the expert representing people that they're not associated with. I know what other people are thinking, kind of thing, but some degree of representation at the table. And um, that is it doesn't matter if they're a stakeholder or a customer or whatever have you. These are people that are going to be affected by decisions and can inform those decisions and will have to live with those outcomes, period. Another is that ability to be adaptive as you learn through those things, because we all know you bring 8 people to the table because those are the people you've identified as being impacted, and before you get up from the table you've identified 3 more. The answer isn't to say that's not the scope, we've limited it to these 8 people, don't scope creep. It's to acknowledge, well, no, we're going into other people's houses now, and we're eating off of their table too. So we have to invite them. So yes, we have to expand as necessary. We have to address that as necessary, not create arbitrary boundaries just because. Another is, ooh, let me think here for a moment. Well, let me pause there. So what's your any thoughts on those two? Because I think that's foundational.
I
That's the place we start.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree entirely. I think there's a devil's advocate question to be asked about, well, okay, but like, where do you draw the line? If I really want to include everybody who's impacted, follow that logic far enough through second, third, and fourth order consequences to anything we do. And hell, I've got to include the entire company or the entire community or the entire globe, which we know is taking it to an extreme. Okay. Our tech
So
is,
let's jump into it.
yeah, our tech is in good shape. We're great. Everything's great.
Yeah.
Let's jump in. So what do you want to start with?
What are your top 5 principles that somebody put in here? And I'll just ask you straight up, what are your
Yeah.
top 5 principles here?
Yeah. Well, and I will be honest, like I was totally not quite sure when someone posted this in the session, like exactly what they meant. Me, Jen, my principles, or, principles for applying complexity science to our work. I think it's probably a combination of many things. I think we also know that when you start to understand that best practices really don't work the same way in applied complexity science, you start to ask, well, what can I have instead of that? Like, what's something else I can grab onto? And I actually think you said this in the live session. At some point, it's really important if you're going to ask people to let go of things that they have held to be truth for a long time. They've got to have some other thing to grab onto or some way to gain purchase. You can't just be afloat. So there's a little bit of that I sense when people are going, okay, I can't rely on these things that I have long held to be truths about how this work is effective. So what can I use instead? And the seeking of principles is one of those. I get a little itchy at the nature of that, for reasons that may or may not be obvious, but I have thoughts. And generally, my concept of principles is also colored by the fact that in the world of design, I think principles as a word is abused
Very
and
much so.
problematic. And,
Mm-hmm.
people hear a design principle and they think it's make it easy, which is not at all useful. I think a principle should actually be something that makes it easier for you to say no to things. It should make it easier for you to know where to make trade-offs. It can't just be a platitude, which is what too many principles are. So if anybody
Mm-hmm.
sensed my like, ugh, principles reaction, that is why. I have some thoughts, but I need to like collect them a little bit. I know you have much more cogent and articulate thinking about principles. So maybe you give me a few, we'll go back and forth and I'll add my thoughts.
Yeah. Since I've been bringing this into large organizations, this is a good rally point because the ask is usually for process, or instructions.
Mm-hmm. Recipes.
Instructions confused with frameworks.
Mm-hmm.
Or frameworks, is the ask, but the instructions are what they really want. And so because I can't provide that, the principles are what they're really asking for. And these are kind of elastic. The way that I'd present this today is different than I presented a year or 3 years ago. But I think one of the standing pieces is that it is inclusive of impacted people. I dispel the idea of the customer, the stakeholder, the user. First of all, it's an argument that always happens, that nobody ever wins. There's rarely any clarity on. It's like there's no gains to come from it at the end of the day. Just drop it. They're impacted people. And I got this from Antoinette Carroll in one of her talks that I was at years ago. But impacted people deserve a seat at the table, or they deserve to be represented at the table, not by experts that are filling in for somebody else's voice, but their group needs representation, self-representation, and active participation. And the way that I would define that impact is that they own resources, of whether it's knowledge or physical resources, and that's a contributor, and it's being used in the design, the change that's happening, or the change is going to impact them and they're going to have to somehow adapt or accommodate that change. That's the relationship that we're moving through, and so the uncertainty there. That's a first core one.
I'm like 100% on the same page about that one, but I can't help but do the devil's advocate thing on two fronts. So get ready. One, I can always hear the chorus of people who are like, yeah, okay, we get it. Like, people aren't users, they're humans. They're not patients, they're humans. Da, 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 da.
Right.
But in some places and scenarios and contexts, it's important to actually identify the different roles people play. So how do you reconcile what you just said with the reality that sometimes, in fact, there was a really cool like study piece I remember from like a little while ago, maybe 6 months ago, about how some people actually strategically adopt the identity of patient when they are trying to advocate for themselves, and that actually helps them do it more assertively and effectively. So like arguments about these sort of like persona lenses that we want to try to avoid, I know at least in your to the point you're making, to avoid the caricature or the stereotyping that we use as a stand-in for the actual person's experience. But how do you reconcile the need for sometimes having a differentiation of roles or experience? Or do you not? Do you stand firm and say, nah?
I don't know that necessarily. Like it's when
it's not a problem.
I don't. The roles that people come to the table and identify themselves with are rare. They're usually like shrugging themselves and going, this might be what it says on my business card. This might be what I'm expected of doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yep.
In reality, here's how I roll up my sleeves. This is where I lean in. This is the value that I add. The stuff that I'm expected to do is 10% of my brain power. The 90% gets applied over here. People are aware of the mess, and we'll get into that all day long in these conversations, but like they're aware of the reality, the representation versus the reality of how this all works. So I try not to dig into that all that much at all.
So like people can bring their own understanding of their role to the process, and if you need labels for some reason, then I mean that on their terms.
Sometimes it is like, who's the decision maker on this and who's involved, but really, like, once you've cleared some of that stuff, that's when you start getting into that next level of, but who's in the room and who's actually doing some of the heavy lifting? And I don't care where their role is or where they exist within an organization or outside the organization, but why do they have their fingerprints on it? And that's what I'm looking for, is the fingerprints smudged on things. That's who I want in, and why their fingerprints are there is not as important.
So you're asking people, leadership, whoever needs to be supporting or sponsoring certain ways of working, to get a little bit more comfortable with not delineating the roles people get to play in work by a title or a lens or a persona that they occupy.
And man, we go on for so long about whether or not the way we build our org structures are representative of the reality of how our orgs actually work. But I try not to get into that conversation at all, because I think there's an acknowledgement of that. And that's usually the cop-out. That's like, that scope is like I just want to be done with this in 6 months, and I want to be accountable for these 3 KPIs, and I want to get out of here and just call it done so I can put it on my end of year accomplishments and escape to the next year. And that's, I don't not sympathize with that. I've had those years. I've definitely been there.
Yeah.
But that's also how we have those like first order successes that then blow up. Those are the messes that I clean up, is the first order successes that then become 5 years of debt that drag and destroy organizations.
Hear that, everyone? That's Kyle's calling card. So
that's exactly.
You thought you were doing a good job and you effed it up. So Kyle's got to be the cleanup guy.
That's it. I am the organizational bag man.
You're gonna win a ton of work based on this, or you are never gonna work again. No, but that's, I think, a very fair point. And I hear the voice of people who are like, okay, well, that's all great, but in my org, it's just the way it is. So sometimes you got to play ball, or you got to just understand that the incentive behind why people cling so tightly to that and to those rules about participation, understand where some of that comes from. And you can usually have a little bit of you can take an end run around it, like Kyle just said, which I like. The other challenge to this that I often find in these conversations is, at the end of the day, if you follow the logic far enough, everybody has the potential to be impacted by everything we do, and like there's a definite like path you follow, and you get to the point where you go, well, everybody's affected by everything. We're all connected to each other, one universal consciousness, and or well, then like where do I even draw the line? Like, what's the point? I'm not going to bother trying. And so, nobody really, I think, expects to take that to its extreme, but I think that presents a challenge for a lot of people. If you're going to advocate for ensuring that there is some actual, I don't want to even just say participatory design. I know that's the phrase we use, and I think that's a good phrase for most things, but what does participatory mean in conflict with or contrast to something else? Like it's just, to me, it's
I know.
straw man. But if you're trying to create the conditions in which everybody has the ability to contribute as much or as little they want, and or drive as little as much they want, where and how do you actually make those decisions and cutoffs? What's that look like? How do you navigate that? How do you interrogate/litigate the boundary between who's in and out as far as a process goes?
All right. So I'm going to take a quick stab at this, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think I know you have some. So first of all, I think my role as a facilitator is more the introduction of these things. And so I can call people in and introduce it. People will grab information. They will know that something is happening, and they will just do. Things will happen, and it's out. I'm not controlling the design of all of that. And so it will spread, and it will happen. The other is, there's another principle here. They all have to sort of apply a bit of tension to each other, that we're doing small interactions. And so that's a good way to avoid that infinite ingress of it's everything. If we're doing small interactions and we are communicative about it, then we pick up on that sensitivity of how things might be impacted. We're doing those small experiments. We're learning through it in a broadcasted sort of way, but we're also not. I think I might have said this in our Complexity Lounge talk a little bit, but like there's this instinct of like, I've just stolen fire from the gods now that I've got this understanding of complexity science. I'm going to go solve world hunger now.
Yeah.
We want to go tackle the biggest thing imaginable in front of us. And really all we need to do is like, if we can just sort out, I don't know, like how we meet or reconnect a couple of teams within a few organizations, like that starts to change a lot of things. If we can change some language on a few things, if we can figure out a few tools here and there, like that's massive change that just reverberates. So like start small.
That's huge. I mean, and also, see, guys, we told you this is going to be the most winding. We're how many minutes in on one principle? We're not going to do 5. Trust us. But I do think that you made that point. But I was in the Complexity Lounge session. But I think it's a good one because like it does feel like we all kind of had the experience or have the experience. It's a little bit like it reminds me of the movie They Live, where he has the glasses and he can see things how they really are. It feels like learning about complexity science or some of the adjacent things that pull people into this is like you put on the glasses and suddenly you like see how things really are. And for some people it's like, they've had some kind of consciousness raising experience and they go off in that direction. And for some people it's like, I can see the matrix and I can paint the picture of the whole system and now I can engineer it. Good luck. But there is a level of in between that leads to this sense of like, can't you all see this? Oh, we all have to do it this way. Everybody who doesn't see it yet is still stuck in the old Newtonian reductionist linear, and we all did it. We all have done it. If you are currently in that phase, like enjoy it. But the sooner you can realize that the real meaningful changes are going to be the things that are happening at the small local interaction level. And that is a very core component of what complexity science teaches us about the nature of complex systems. So it isn't just this kind of you learn it through human experience. It's also what the science tells us. So if you're one of those folks who needs to be told by the science, it's there. So yeah, you can put on the They Live glasses, but recognize you still have to live with people and work with people who either don't have the glasses or would think you're mad for describing what you see, or who, are the bad guys. We're not going to go with the good guy, bad guy. I think that though, go ahead.
Well, I was just saying, how do you avoid being the person on the corner with the sandwich board, doomsday megaphone, with the your glasses on? How do you avoid that infinite ingress
I
of
don't
everything?
go to the corner with the sandwich board and the speaker.
Hmm.
If we're gonna like totally abuse this metaphor, I sidle
Hmm.
into the bar and sit next to somebody, or I'm in a coffee shop and make conversation with the person I'm in line
Hmm.
with. Okay, imagine this applied now to like a work setting, but for me, it's much more. I've said this before. I said it in the other session. I know I use the Trojan horse metaphor a lot, but it really isn't quite like a Trojan horse in that you go in looking and appearing like you're one thing, and then behind the enemy lines, you jump out and you're doing something different, like this gotcha. It isn't like that, but it is a little bit similar in the sense that I'm not trying to do any convincing or announcing. I know a question we will get to eventually, and folks did ask, and I think we can do more justice to now, is about how we actually engage in these projects in the early stages, how we even like frame them or scope them or sell them, not just what they look like when we did them. But I do think that like trying to really, hey everybody, this is a thing we all need to be thinking about is not only futile, it will wear you out and will use up all the energy you should be using for what you do when you just are next to somebody doing work a certain way and they go, hey, what you're doing is a little different. What's going on? Can you tell me more about this? Then, if there's interest, you slowly can share resources, share thinking, talk, collaborate in a way. So this is where I always use that other metaphor that I know you're sick of around. It's like immersive language learning. So it's not everybody, we need to learn to speak this language. You need to learn the like vocab. You need to learn the grammar. Da, da, da. It's much
Yeah.
more like come hang out with me and I'll just start sprinkling in some different phrases, or we'll go hang out in another country and you'll just start to learn some of it by osmosis. So
Hmm.
I find that experience seems to be this like really common universal frustration. And we get it. We've all been there and we all still experience it sometimes. But to your point about having some of these principles, especially the one about participation, it helps start to like provide a little safety and scaffolding for people who would otherwise hear us talk about how most of what a complexity informed approach to certain management or other types of business practices would like blow up their sort of orthodoxy. I think it's far less threatening. And like maybe if I had to sum it up, I try to do the opposite of be threatening. I don't
Hmm.
try to, be manipulative, and I don't try to be, whatever ever adjectives you'd want to put there, but I make myself safe. That phrase I love, safe spaces for dangerous thinking. I want to be a safe person and I want to make myself a safe space for someone to think about or entertain something that's a little bit strange or scary. In the world of our work, that can a lot of times mean Jen's talking some weird stuff about complex systems. That's challenging everything I learned in my MBA program. And I can't admit that out loud to my peers, but I can kind of ask her about it when she's here doing this weird stuff she does. And so that's how it shows up in work. But you and I have talked a lot, and I know we'll get into some other more personal topics. Like, I think safe spaces for dangerous thinking shows up in a lot of other places in my life and in your life. And I suspect in other people who are drawn to this
Oh
work.
yeah.
Music's a big one,
Yeah.
and some others. But yeah. Should we say more about principles? I mean, I did pull up. So when you asked that question, I
Good.
happened to go and pull up
Good.
because after I was done being snarky about principles, I was like, I
Okay.
can talk about principles. I pulled
Yeah.
up
Let's hear one.
the last time that I actually gave a talk about this, and I did say, here are some principles to think about. And I,
Hmm.
like you, what I would change these if I was writing this today. But I actually want to just rattle them off, and you can pick
Please.
out one if you want.
Yeah.
So one of them is design less, enable more. So this was aimed a little bit more at
Hmm.
designers and design adjacent practitioners, but it's
Love it.
really more about uh, being a little bit more context dependent and oblique in your approach. Another was
Hmm.
reduce the distance between information and people. I mean, this is like the fancy word for this is disintermediated, right? Trying to remove the levels or layers of abstraction and empower people to actually take action with information that they have at hand. A big one I know you and I agree about is avoiding premature convergence. If you're into the
Hmm.
divergent, convergent, double diamond, which I am, but also I know lots of people hate for various reasons. I
Hmm.
think that's the big one. If you are going to pick if you're team divergence or team convergence, I think more people we work with are team convergence. Very comfortable when things are converging on a clear path, but trying to avoid
Yeah.
that premature process is really where the magic is. Another one is aim for coherence and not total alignment. This is probably one that I end up talking a lot about more than I always remember that I do, especially in client environments. I don't really think there's like this hard and fast rule semantically about like alignment versus coherence. But when I talk to clients about this and I say, let's think about this for a minute, what are you actually looking for when you say we need better alignment? It's not that you really want literal alignment, everyone all pointing the exact same direction like lemmings, right? It's much more like if you look at the picture of a wind vector diagram, or the other one I use is like a magnetic field diagram, both of which people are like, I don't get science, I don't want this, I'm not here for this. But it's less about what they represent, and it's more to say, you can look at those two diagrams, you see coherence, you can understand what's happening with the magnetic field, you can understand what's happening with the wind diagram. There's a low pressure storm here. Even though every particle in the system is pointed different directions, the system as a whole is doing something that you can make sense of. So I say this a lot in a lot of work settings. I don't know if this is a principle. I think it's more just be thinking about the difference between alignment and coherence. And I'm not going to be a stickler about the vocab, but what do those unlock for people? And then the last two, one is to approach things indirectly, which I alluded to earlier, but I usually will say this out loud directly, explicitly. Again, the importance of oblique approaches, because you can't control outcomes. You can, wiggle and nudge things until more desirable things start to emerge that you can stimulate and scale from there. And last is engage in risky play. That's probably one of my other favorites, which is simply that I think the ability to hold space for or build enough slack into a system for play and for serendipity isn't just like for fun and delight and employee engagement, but because those are places and environments where, that exaptive kind of innovation will unfold, where people will understand and have the trust in themselves and others that they won't be putting their livelihood at risk if they're allowed to engage in that kind of play. And I say risky in the spirit of the way that this phrase is used with kids. This understanding in modern parenting that giving kids opportunities to actually do things that are mildly dangerous teaches them how to make a little bit of a plan and have some thinking about some possible outcomes, some of that future thinking and different perspective taking kind of skills you build when you think about the scenarios. I'm about to climb this pile of flaming tires. What could happen? I'm going to do it anyway. And then also it builds their confidence, because if something goes a little wrong and they fall and they skin their knee, sure, that sucks and it hurts. And maybe they need someone to kiss the boo-boo, but it reinforces you didn't die. You can handle this. You can do this. And so I think as an adult, we need more of that in the workplace as well. It does the exact same thing for adults as it does for kids. You take a risk, you don't die, even if it doesn't go as planned, and you build the muscle memory and the confidence that you then take into the next iteration or innovation process. That's my fast list. I would probably change like half of those now.
I love those. That's what I would bring to a room full of other designers.
Exactly. This was for a design audience. You're talking more too, I think, about the client or on the other end. So this is good context.
Yeah, exactly. Now I'm going to play devil's advocate on one of those. So
I'm happy.
Risky play. Let's take that a little bit. Let's take that to run fast and break things. The Silicon Valley run fast and break. Yeah. Where do you start to at least set up some of those ethical guardrails that say this could escape the lab on somebody's shoe and create real problems? Yeah. How do we create those guardrails so that we're not it is contained the right way? We are still allowing ourselves to play, but this isn't going to affect real people. We're truly simulating, or we're truly in an isolated, protected environment.
Yeah, I think there's sort of a couple pieces to that. One, of course, is to even think about, like you just said, container guardrails. You're using very external metaphors, scaffolding or things from the outside that are meant to shape or contain constraints that are governing constraints, I guess, for our friends in the biz. And yet you could also be asking, what kind of things could we be reinforcing or shaping or encouraging that are internal for the people involved, so that they have a better sense of, what some of the ethical implications of what they do might be. So my first answer is not even an answer. It's a reverse Uno card to be like, well, external, internal, I might challenge that, But my other real answer, I think, is more to say, if you ask somebody who either has kids or if they don't, you can imagine or think about family or think about pets or some other kind of scenario where you're responsible for, say, a living creature that can't always think and make decisions appropriately for itself. How do you decide what you're going to let your kid do? How and when do you decide this is too much autonomy for them versus let's feel this out? And like parents take the playground burning tire, climb on top of the jungle gym, whatever example, you could just sit back on the bench and let that kid go. And they do something dangerous and you go, they're probably not going to break a bone, whatever, literally hands off. That's a different scenario than, hey, Timmy, you're getting pretty high. Pause for a second. Do you have a plan? That's a common question they ask, kids who are, if you're engaged in this kind of thing, right? Like, do you have a plan or how are you feeling? Like, take stock for just a second. What you're doing there is not necessarily saying you can or can't do this, but you are providing some of that scaffolding that not only encourages internally that person to do some reflection and think through what's going to happen, but you're still giving them the final call. Versus a parent who might walk over and like hover right nearby and be like, I'm here if you need me, or I'm here to catch you, or I'll spot you, or whatever. Think about just the difference in those three ways you could still be supporting risky play. How would you decide as an individual which of those tactics you're going to take? I think that applies to your question when we talk about like break or move fast and break things. There's no implied regard for what is going to be broken. We either assume it won't be human. Of course, we know it will be, if not directly, then indirectly. And the move fast part is kind of this indiscriminate, like speed is our friend because we need to move fast so we can shorten our iterative cycles. And the implication is that we can learn fast. But will you learn if what you're doing is simply running headlong without having some kind of future or prefigurative thinking? Like, I have a hypothesis or I am anticipating this thing. Now I'm moving towards it and finding out that's not unfolding. So there are missing pieces in the move fast and break thing that I think are implied by risky play. Whether or not people think about them consciously, I don't know, but I think it's baked in implicitly, and that's why I like that phrase. So
yeah, I like that. Usually the move fast just habitualizes moving fast.
Yeah.
Well, the risking play is the slowdown is the important component.
It's risky play. It's not risky other verb. So there's also a point that it's meant to be, not risky driving, risky whatever. It's risky play. So there's an implication that what's happening is happening in a slightly less consequential context. And when you get to a place where things are much higher stakes, you ain't going to do that. You're going to have far more precautions, guardrails, whatever needs to be in place to protect the humans that are on the other end of it.
I like it. I'm gonna toss out two more here. And because I think you covered pretty much everything else that I had on my list for the most part. Human-centered is a thing that I use because it's a common thing, but we're in a safe space here.
You and me both being like, human-centered. Tell us why.
It's the amount of awful things that have been done in the name of human-centeredness, and usually participatory. Usually, the reason why I like participatory is because it's not co-design. Co-design is the one that I feel is usually precedes.
It's the opposite. Like
really?
Yeah, this is why I laugh because but anyway, go ahead. Every word.
My experience is we're going to do co-design. We're going to invite people in for a brown bag.
Yeah.
We're going to show them the thing that we're going to do. And if nobody vomits, then we're going to go do it. And that's co-design.
Yeah. You all get credit.
Excellent. Yeah. And human-centered is like, then we did human-centered design because we did that co-design brown bag session. Yeah. But it is the language. So I throw that into my deck from time to time, trying to define a little bit just the acknowledgement of the messiness of people, and also to acknowledge we're not going to do personas. We're not going to pretend that people are one thing with any consistency. We're going to allow people to bring intuition and sort of gut and feeling and notice signals. Noticing is going to be an important part of the whole process. We're going to use abstraction. to discover things, especially if we're working in spaces that are complex, that are new, that are we're trying to innovate through. Trying to problem solve through because we don't understand what's on the other end of this. We don't have the right to go to a playbook or a manual. We don't have the right to show data or measurements for a place we've never been before or a thing we've never done before. And so we have to feel around in the dark, and we have to use whatever senses are available to us or whatever, sort of innate abilities we have available to us to do that. So let's be human in this place. Let's be feral in this space is what I mean when I say human-centered.
I like that you said feral. And I think we talked about this, you and I, at some point previously.
Right.
But like the word feral does so much work. There's a lot of interest in our world. Everyone likes the ecosystem metaphors. I use them myself, gardening, tending to things. Like they're getting old, honestly. I want more and better, but I still use them because they're meaningful. And that just because like the gardening metaphor is starting to happen everywhere doesn't mean that it's bad. It's because it resonates.
I haven't corrupted it yet.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Yeah.
But I bring that up because there's an interest in the notion of gardening and tending to natural cycles, and the difference between gardening versus architecting works for a lot of people's brains. And then you also see a lot of interest in the notion of rewilding, returning to a state of, more natural's an iffy word. Yeah, good one. That's super. You want to say something about that?
This is backwards. I have my tending to endings deck here, which is absolutely gorgeous.
Good. Cool.
Yeah.
But I think that interest in working with more organic or studying, what we can learn from nature and indigenous wisdom about the way that systems will kind of naturally do whatever they do. Like there's pros and cons to this language, and it's a little even itself reductionist. But feral, I like the word feral in contrast with wild. Because something that is wild, at least to me, implies it's always been wild or relatively untouched or hasn't been domesticated. Whereas feral is something that maybe was domesticated and has then returned to a state of wild or close to it. And so I like the U-turn trip that the word feral implies. So I just had to call that out because you threw it in there and I was like, oh, I love the word
human-centered.
Yeah,
human-centered
rewilding. That is dope. Let me defend human-centered, even though I'm usually the one who hates on it. Really against, not you, but
please.
I also think that like it suffers in much the way participatory design does and others from the fact that as we move through a phase where more and more people kind of understand that way of thinking and why it's important, eventually people kind of get ready to, I hate the phrase, but like level to the next thing. And so you look back and you go, well, human-centered has gotten us in a lot of problems because humans really shouldn't be the center. We're just one of many things. And so then it's like, well, what else is it? Okay, now we're globe-centered, environment-centered, life-centered, whatever centered, and I always like to argue it's not the thing, it's the centering. Stop doing the centering. But, get away from that metaphor and maybe rhizomes. But I also will defend it because human-centered represented a departure from what came before, which was not to even consider the human on the other end of the experience. The same thing happens with co-design or participatory design. I think we've gotten a lot savvier about how to engage the humans that are going to be impacted by work we might be doing. And there are notions of radical participatory design that I think are really critical, which is that if those people over there are the ones who are impacted, they should actually be leading the work. And maybe we support, right? Rather than the other way around. But that's hard for a lot of organizations and teams to figure out how to even make happen. And there's a level of like, well, if your participatory design isn't radical, then it's shit. And it's not that case. It's still better than, etc. So another shout out to more than human design, which is looking at the impact on animals and flora and fauna. And I think there are definitely people who want to criticize aspects of that because sometimes people find it easier to have empathy for big game animals in Africa than to have for minorities in their neighborhood. That's its own issue. But that to me isn't a reason to throw away the ideas of more than human design. So for anyone listening and you struggle with this, are we human-centered? Wait, that's not in anymore. Are we, is it participatory or is it co-design? Wait, can't use that. That's not in anymore. Same thing is going to happen with systems and complexity too, soon enough. So
Right.
I try not to get too hung up on the words. And if I'm working with a client who clearly the concept of being human centered is old and table stakes, then I will challenge them to think a little bit more provocatively about it. If it's a client for whom being human centered truly still feels radical, then we will use that language and we will center in that. And I think being flexible about that is important.
Yeah, we go for days on this one too, I
Are you a
imagine. But
human
like,
centered designer, Kyle?
what I think is really worrisome, and I found myself in this position not long ago, where this was the attractor. We need human centered designers, and we'll all come together and we'll do this thing. And it was sort of, it was taken for granted that this was an affordance we were using, that we were all aware of what that meant, and so we were going to sit down, we were going to move forward with this structure of inclusion and representation and participatory design and all of this. And wow, we went like 3 different ways. And most of it was, no, how do we move fast and break things and get experts to represent other people? And how do we just satisfy our contract and our clients? And a bunch of other people are going, no, yeah, but this has like massive impact if we get this wrong. And the answer is like, yeah, it also has an impact on our business if we don't get this contract renewed. So, all right, we'll stop. I get it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that wasn't the call.
Yeah.
And we wasted a lot of time. We wasted this affordance. And so that's, I get it. We got to name this. This is the conversation that has to happen so that it is not taken for granted. It's not abused as an affordance. It's questioned as we go into those sort of things, because that needs that. I'm totally fine. I'm often going in and saying, this is the ideal situation. Everyone's sitting. We're having this massive committee. We're sorting things out. We're all wearing our get along shirt and we're figuring this out. That's never. We're always making compromises somewhere.
Yeah.
But informed consent is another one of these principles that I think is a non-negotiable. That we're willing to make those compromises, but we've gone into it earnestly.
So this question, which I think we started with for good reason, knowing this would be quite rich. And I don't we're not going to go through question by question, of course, but I think this person was like 5, and what are we at? Like 10 here. You notice we're riffing on these, and they switch.
Exactly.
And there are very good. I mean, if you just Google principles and complexity, there are actually some really, really smart pieces out there, some good writing from different big thinkers. So if you are a person that kind of is oriented to, or, you kind of feel like it's helpful to have these kind of things handy for conversations with collaborators and stakeholders, there's all kinds of a good wealth of stuff out there. If you have questions, bring them to the live session, because this is something we can dig into some more. But it was interesting to see it on the day, and I didn't answer it on the day because I was like, I just struggle with the word principle. And then I went just really to talk about principles. So
yeah. And I'll throw one last one out there.
Yes.
And obviously there's so much more, like we could add trauma informed everything into all of that. We could add the epistemic sovereignty into all of this. We could
and humility.
All of these have ands.
Yes.
Sure, exactly. There's so many ands.
Humility is where I'm at lately. Anyway, go ahead. Tell me yours.
I like that.
We'll come back.
The last one I would add, and I don't know how to frame this one. I like design for the ends rather than ors. I like Bucky Fuller's omni-considerate systems, the way that he frames it, which I usually try not to use that language with my stakeholders. You'll get it. Most of the folks listening to this at least will write it down and go look it up if they don't get it. But this is another one of those tension points of how do we keep ourselves from escaping, and how do we keep that informed consent. That designing for the ends is also finding some of those compromises, the intersections and the acknowledgement of those intersections. That I can't say we all get the thing we all need, but if we sit down and we think about it hard enough and work hard enough on it, we are going to come up with some interesting ideas to play with at those intersections.
Yeah. This is interesting. I feel like there's about a million ways to go. I'm looking at the time. I can chat for 10, 15. You want to
Sure.
anything else coming up? Anything standing out to you? Or
Do we
anything
want to?
that
I
you
don't
want
know if we want to jump to another one of these questions. You know what? We can do this other question because I think this is a good kind of nightcap to this conversation. So I'll ask you this one. What patterns are you paying attention to?
Oh God, another one of these questions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this question has like micro, meso, and macro answers.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I think that's true for everybody. And I also, again, this is another question. Unlike the questions that are like, can you please talk me through an example of how you identified an opportunity and then how you sold it? That's very clear to me. But whoever posed this question, I would love it if you came to the next live session and asked us more or responded and added. Because is it interesting to people to hear what you and I are seeing in the kind of wider world, or is it
Mm-hmm.
more about what we're seeing on like a small scale in each of the projects that we're doing that actually has kind of cross implications or similarities? So I would say I am definitely noticing, first of all, an increasing interest in complexity, like an increasing interest in the energy. If you think about the Gartner hype cycle or whatever, like we're moving a little bit further up that hill. I would I don't buy that that's like an inevitability, that like pattern, but I would say that there is definitely a pattern wherein we talked about earlier, someone encounters this stuff and then is like gung-ho about. And I see that as a pattern, and I don't think it requires intervention. I don't think there's
Mm-hmm.
something about it that we need to do anything about. In fact, I kind of think that's true about all patterns, but we'll come back. But that's like a kind of macro thing I'm observing. I'm also observing an interest in certain spaces, the ones that I tend to work in, the industries that I'm in a lot, or the type of leaders that are, calling me up for help on things. They actually get that things are complex. They may not have the language,
Mm-hmm.
they may not have learned about systems or complexity, but like, I don't think the hyper linear, reductionist, orthodox scientific management, Taylorism persona of a leader is really out there, or at least is not like our biggest barrier. And I'm sort of paying attention to that I'm seeing some people recognize like that is a bit of a straw man, and maybe the quote real enemy is not people who don't think the right way about this, and more the conditions in which we're all trying to do this work. And at least here in the States, highly financialized. Every company in this country, if they're a publicly traded company, is a financial company first. And then it's whatever else it does second. And so everything is live or die by the quarterly earnings and keeping shareholders happy, which
Mm-hmm.
then, of course, leads to a lot of the short term thinking and the challenges that come with that. And yes, you can be a punk and you can say, this is late capitalism. It is. It should all burn. There are all kinds of things that need to change. But all of that aside, when you're done singing your punk and metal lyrics and you've taken your mohawk out and you've taken off your anarchist A jacket, mine's over in the closet, like
Mm-hmm.
you kind of realize, but this is the substrate that we're in. This is the current. And so work with the dispositional state. And I bring this up as a pattern that I'm seeing, that I'm watching other people
Yeah.
like wake up to this. And I'll say wake up, like wake up sheeple, but more just that's a pattern on a macro scale that I am just observing and I am noticing, and I don't have anything else to say about it other than I think it's worth paying attention to. Not just the state of things, but the fact that other people are kind of starting to notice some of this. But, how far reaching that is also, I don't know, because I have my own little local bubble that I'm in. So I will be curious. But I'll say one more, and then I want you to respond and add and such.
Mm-hmm.
The other
Yeah.
one, and you've heard me say this a million times, most people have seen me in some place or another talk about it. It's learning all the way down. And I'm starting to, in the last several years, pay a lot more attention to, this isn't quite what I think this person's asking, but I think learning is an emergent pattern. I do not think of learning as the
Mhm.
learning cycle, the Kolb cycle, the whatever triple loop learning. Like those all have important roles to play. I'm not talking about learning like that. I'm not talking about learning as the acquiring of knowledge and skills or a transactional kind of classroom environment or a training session. Those all fine. I am talking about learning as an emergent pattern that any system shares regardless of its scale with any other system. And the system can be a single human, it can be individuals interacting with each other, it can be teams, communities, companies, whole systems, can be non-human things. And I know some folks are going to go, yeah, Jen, cybernetics, but that ain't it either. So I'm still working on language around this, but it's a pattern that emerged for me, or it became visible to me a little over a decade ago, that I'm starting to really try to figure out how to talk about, because I do think looking at learning as an emergent pattern that is self-similar at every scale, fractal, like I think can be kind
Mhm.
of useful for people. So we'll probably dig into that more, I'm sure, at some point. But
Yeah, I'm
those are my
certain.
answers to the patterns. What are yours?
Okay. I love that. So I'm seeing some similar stuff. So
I was
I
hoping you'd
will
tell me it was all
say
wrong, something different.
no. Well, I'm gonna slightly skew from one of them,
Cool.
and that is I agree that people are getting more familiar with complexity. I see a less of a stress level, less of a need to control. And I think I've heard Dave Snowden say this a few times. They're recognizing that it's a condition that we have to live with rather than a problem we have to solve. That's a post-COVID, post-Trump response.
Mhm.
Um, but I would say that the thing that people are noticing, the questions that we saw about why is leadership still stuck in this old Tayloristic, mechanistic, Newtonian, linear way of thinking and doing things, I think that that's still a valid observation at the same time, but I think that that recognition is a little bit skewed in that I think you're right. The humans, people in the system are saying it's kind of wonky. And that's the language. It's like it's fuzzy, it's weird, it's tangled. They're having a much more relaxed way of using all of
Yeah.
the kindergarten language
Yeah.
around this, but they're talking about it. But the institutions are still built
Yeah.
on those old systems and they're
Absolutely.
still running downhill and they
Yeah.
don't know what to do about it.
Yeah.
And they're trying to now like lean outside of that. And that's where I think where we get called in
Yeah.
is it's usually somebody that's like sticking their head out of like coming up for air for a moment and going
Yeah.
like, please help. Like this whole thing is just destined for
Yeah.
something to collapse. Can you just
I'm
give
in
me
a
a little bit of
runaway
reprieve here?
machine that is like on
Yeah.
rails, but I can see that that is not serving us, but I don't
You're
know how to stop the machine. Can you throw a wrench in
right.
the wheels? Gladly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not trying to like paint this delusion of grandeur that we're coming in, we're saving these massive organizations from
We're not.
themselves.
We're not.
It's just somebody coming in and saying, please give me a little bit of clarity for a moment so I can get a night's rest. And
Yeah.
that's really it.
Well, and I
Uh,
think that's I like so well put, because I think that's the thing that is starting people I think are starting to see the difference between there's a person that is making this the way it is versus what we are experiencing is the sum total of so many interdependent and dynamic factors. So path dependence, baby, like, we are stuck with some of these things. We're not stuck with them forever, but
right.
we're saying that like what we've got is the result of yesterday's solutions or today's problems, whatever,
Right.
right? You say
Right.
it, whatever.
Right.
But it's very, very much, I think, an interesting a thing to observe. Our collaborators and the people
Mm-hmm.
that we might work with as clients or stakeholders for our work, kind of feeling out like where they are in that recognition process, and knowing that even if there are a whole bunch of people like in the cockpit of this runaway institutional kind of structure, and everybody in that cockpit is like, I would love for us to let go of some of these old ways of thinking, nonetheless this machine like was built for a certain type of thing, flight, and it
Right.
has all kinds of things in it, so you can't just crash the plane in hopes that we can do something else. Gosh, this metaphor has gone very morbid, but you've got to think about what can we
Yeah.
do here to like safely land this plane and then go do something else, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah.
I also cannot find. I was once introduced to a framework by somebody that that basically outlines that there are lots of different roles for people to play. If you are a fan of thinking through this, like hospicing modernity and thinking through the way things might be shifting and changing and blah, 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 there are different roles for people to play. One of them might be thinking about and imagining new futures. One of the roles might be helping break apart the current in a faster way, like subverting in some ways. One of the roles might simply be helping the people who are still stuck in it. I cannot find for the life of me the original framework that was shared with me on this. I've seen variations and iterations that aren't hitting it. So maybe if you know it or we go hunt for it later, but regardless of whether you have a framework, doesn't matter. What I just said is the point. I think there's a lot of different roles for people to play in the process, but
I think I know what you're talking about, but I'm not sure.
We'll go look it up. What else? Yeah. What else, if anything, are you noticing patterns, or do you want to challenge anything else?
No, that was the only one that I want to kind of jump off of. The one other one that I'm noticing, and maybe it's two of them that are kind of intersected, is the number of people that are actually finding are becoming proficient in working in this space, are attracted to working in this space, but not using the same language, not coming from the same domain. I'm finding this conversation is happening in the sustainability space. I'm finding in the racial justice space. I'm finding it in management consulting and design and 5 other spaces. And everybody has a different word for what they're doing or what they're talking about, or they don't know what they're doing and they don't have any good words, but it's like 5 phrases that are just around. It's the people that have 8 different things after their name on LinkedIn that are somewhat related. And so we're playing with Venn diagrams, nothing specific at the moment. And a lot of people are in the wind. A lot of people are either looking for work or they're trying to figure out what they're going to do next, or they've made a few jumps somewhere in the last few years. And so I'm actually really encouraged by this, and I think you've heard me say this ad nauseum, is that we're at a time when people are connecting and discovering what all of this is. And I'm still using vague terms like this because I don't have a good word for this, but we're figuring this out. We're connecting, we're figuring it out together. We're building this network, and somebody's going to hit it somewhere. Somebody's going to come up with some experiment. Somebody's going to say, I'm going to put together the studio, or I'm going to build the department, or I'm going to put the team together, or I'm going to try a project. And 5 people are going to come together that are already in this space and they're proficient. It's going to be less about how do I convince 3 people that have never heard this stuff and like try to teach them a philosophy that they're totally unaware of, or try to drag them out of doing the same thing for 20 years into another space. And instead, it's going to be this incredible momentum that starts on day 1 and sparks, and something amazing is going to happen there. And that's, or not, something is going to blow up, and we're going to learn from that too. But whatever, like that's going to be a evolutionary moment in all of this, I think.
This is so interesting, and I know we want to wrap a little in a minute or two, so maybe this will be a good part to start on next time. But since I can't help myself, I don't know if I agree. I wonder when you talk about it, I hear echoes of like Gregory Bateson and those guys, getting together. I think of like Xerox PARC and like different examples where, there's this like story and how much of it's like post hoc constructed. I mean, of course, but even so, there are these stories about a couple people who got together and then like things grew, a movement grew. But I wonder, like, take for example what you just described. I think a lot of people are hoping and waiting. And to that, I'm like, who are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? And I know that's not quite what you mean, but I'm going to ask that of you anyway. It always reminds me of like, do you ever see that documentary Waiting for Superman about school reform? If not, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
This similar idea in other places, kind of waiting for not salvation, but for won't somebody somewhere, or won't, I can't wait for this thing to hit a critical mass. And I think to myself, is that even how this works? And I say this, we're talking about applied complexity science, I guess.
Sure.
Or a complexity-ish way of thinking, which gets far off into the fuzzy land beyond places that I don't even like to think or go. But what are you waiting for, Kyle?
Well, it's not that we don't need a Superman. We were talking about this before. It's not the massive intervention. It's not the world-changing thing. And I'm not even really talking about that so much as the connections are changing, which is introducing new things. It's the uh the the learning is happening as the tangling is happening,
Yeah,
and all of that is creating new affordances.
yeah.
And I'm just seeing that happen rapidly.
You're
Uh,
almost describing this less as eventually a couple people are going to get together and create a thing or do a thing or convene a thing, and that's going to be the jumping off point. And I don't hear you saying that now. I hear you saying more like we are running the Large Hadron Collider right now, and we are seeing so many interesting things happen. We just know that if this runs long enough, we might see a Higgs boson pop into existence, and that might be something that sparks all kinds of other things. Yes,
I
no?
think it's a little bit of both. I think that there's an active component in this, and there's a passive component.
Yeah.
I don't. Maybe passive is the wrong way to think. There's a more active component to this, and an active. The active component is the affordances being created,
Yeah.
but the more active is the when somebody ends up in that sort of I'm going to create space and I'm going to gather
Yeah.
space and I'm going to do and I'm going to get other people that are doing. And when that network's large enough, and you can if you can need to find 3 people that are ready to do, it's not going to be quite the same as did Jobs and Wozniak just happen to trip over each other in that garage and create that thing. It's quite the serendipitous moment. It'll be there will be this affordance to create.
I'm just this is definitely a place where we diverge because
Okay.
I think those networks are already out there. And I think a lot of people are connecting. And I think we can talk more too about even the ones we're
Mm-hmm.
involved in. You and I are
Mm-hmm.
members of a lot of different communities, and many
Mm-hmm.
of them intersect and overlap. And I think when I hear this, I hear, okay, it's more that there's like a network effect that you're kind of anticipating. And I
Mm-hmm.
can see that for sure. But I do think to myself, well, if it's something that you, not you individually, but one are,
Mm-hmm.
you're anticipating, um, okay, why not yet? Why hasn't it? Why aren't you like, there's a little bit. And the reason I say all this isn't to challenge, to be like, well, what are you waiting for? But more because
Mm-hmm.
it's so different from how I perceive my own interaction and participation in bringing complexity science into work I do in my
Mm-hmm.
practice, as well as in
Mm-hmm.
my day-to-day life. And it's so much, I don't even feel that kind of anticipation because I already feel like I am pulling these things into what I do every day in a way that it wouldn't appear meaningfully different to me if everyone around me spoke the language one day more than they do now. And that might be that I'm in a unique place, but I also didn't, I sensed your earlier point too that so many folks are in a place where they've been laid off or they're really unhappy where they're
Right.
at, or they're trying to go independent. It's a weird time in the market, and definitely in the States, I'm sure elsewhere as well. And I think there's
Yeah.
a little bit of a wishful kind of thinking around, gosh, I wish somebody would just start the complexity science agency and hire me, or I wish that there was a
Mm-hmm.
job that was complexity person, or I
Sure.
wish that the job description for me was do complexity, and then I wish my boss
Right.
would get out of my way and order everyone else to do what I tell them to do. Like, there's not
Yes.
really that explicit, but there's an implication of that in what I hear you saying, and it's probably not fair
Mm-hmm.
or accurate, but maybe it is. And I don't get that. I don't feel that. To me, these are ways of understanding the world and lenses you can put on things. And
Mm-hmm.
I got my sunglasses that I can wear and look at. You go get yours and go. Could bring it into your
Yeah.
world. So challenge me. I don't know. Maybe there's obviously many ways of seeing this, but
You're not wrong. There is definitely a bit of risk. There's a lot of risk aversion. And there's a lot of reasons for risk aversion right now. It's a scary place to go take a risk, the world right now. And a lot of people are I think the people that are in the wind don't have anything to take a risk with.
Fair.
They're not in a position of power to go jump out and seize anything at the
Yep.
moment. So they are looking for that. Like, where can I
Yep.
interject? Where can I grab something? And so that network effect, those affordances that are being created, are going to become enablers for all of them that are out there, which is, I think, interesting. And maybe I'm being too prescriptive about where this goes, but the wait is something we talk about slowing down a lot, but we don't talk about waiting enough. And that's a similar thing,
Yes.
but it's a little different.
Yeah.
It is just a little different.
I feel you.
And that waiting thing is interesting, and that being less prescriptive in what that actually means is kind of interesting. But I think waiting is actually a fair thing to do, knowing that these affordances are being created. Waiting to see what it affords is exciting. Now, what I've assumed is that it creates this cluster of people that go do and create something, and then it becomes easier to talk about because it becomes a little bit more broadcast, and so that is a one divergent path it could take.
I definitely also would never blame or there's really no judgment here from anybody who's like, I'm not in a position to do anything. It's really less about, why don't you go do something? It's more that if I sense that folks are frustrated that it hasn't happened, that the critical mass hasn't been reached, or that the singularity with complexity suddenly being everywhere has not occurred yet. It's more about the folks that I know who I think lament that what you're anticipating has not yet happened, and why not. And I think to myself about how, and we were chatting with some other folks the other day, and one of them, hopefully she'll join us on one of these at some point, like made a very good point. Like, this stuff takes a long time to learn and integrate. And I think right now, this isn't like you young whippersnappers need to put in your time and street cred, but it's more like there's a sort of an expectation when you just have that mindset shift or whatever, there I said the bad word, mindset, about the world or about the nature of work and business. If that shifts for you, that's great, but that doesn't mean that suddenly everything that we know about complexity is now loaded into your operating system. And I think there are some folks out there who are frustrated that they haven't been able to just kind of rush out into the world and be able to bring more of this immediately into their work, and want to blame the environment, the companies, everything we talked about, whether it's individual leaders or the institutions and path dependence we've got in front of us. I also think some of it is like, hey man, that's not even reasonable to expect. What you can do is look at the skills you have now without complexity even attached, and continue to find opportunities to use those skills, and then pull the complexity into that practice. And I sort of, maybe I'm going to come off like a jerk, but like, I definitely feel like we need more people who are just willing to say, I don't need an opportunity to do complexity. I am doing this other job with this other title, and I am infusing the complexity science lens onto what I'm doing in any way I can. And maybe I'm not being fair, and maybe most people that I'm imagining in this like imaginary like argument that I'm making don't even exist. So
no, I just had this conversation recently. We had a number of these, and the distance between the I understand some of this, I'm passionate about it, but how do I go do it? Is what sparked so much of this conversation.
Why this conversation's happening, right?
Exactly.
Interest in this, so
why we have these communities.
They're going to hit stop right now and be like, "Fuck these guys!"
Right?
Oh no, there's more that is hopeful. It's coming, we swear.
But like, that was part of my arc, was at the very beginning, like, oh, okay, so there's a role for this, there's a job for this, there's a place in the organization. They just have to realize it. I need to have the credibility with an organization to be able to say, I'm going to create my own role. And I was with an organization when I found this, that I did have that credibility and was able to create that role. And I went, great, let's run. And then I got laid off. And now I have to like go back to square one of, all right, I'm going to be a service designer that does this. And so how do I Trojan horse this? And as I've been talking to people, I'm going, it's actually doable. And so don't quit your day job.
Yes.
Just learn this. Like,
Team
ring the bell.
Good job.
Yeah, ring the bell and let it be unrung, and go do your thing and ask questions differently. Draw with squiggly lines. That's keep
Yeah.
going. It'll work.
I love that. I mean, don't quit your day job, combined with like the number of times that I'm encouraging folks who are like, I'm miserable here, but I don't want to leave because I've got this, and this. And I'm like, listen, think about it like covert ops. That's why, again, I like the behind enemy lines notion. I very much enjoy it. I don't think about my clients as enemies, but you're in enemy territory, foreign territory. You're an ethnographer. You're Jane Goodall among the gorillas, whatever one you like. So don't quit your day job. That's it. That's a good place for us to pause.
That's the place to call it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll stop there. Let me
Wonderful.
hit stop.